quality of life. That's the second part. We've looked at what a medical doctor is in a sense obligated to provide. When they make a claim of they have enhanced something, or an intervention has more benefit to burden, or it had more benefit than risk, as Dykema and these other doctors do throughout all these articles. As you read them, you'll see it over and over again. They claim that the Ashley treatment, or this regime of treatment, had more benefit for Ashley than burden or risk. They claim that. Well, we have seen now, looking at these sort of simplified little math examples and talking through them, we have seen how they would have had to have done it in terms of the math to arrive at the conclusion they arrived at. This has to be offered to us. If this is not there, then we don't know if they did it or not. So they have to have done this. Otherwise, their claim that the benefits outweighed the risk cannot be substantiated. That's the first half of what we need for reason 2. The second half is quality of life. What is quality of life? The reality is, in medicine at this moment, medical science, there's a lot of agreement and there's a lot of disagreement. This is a concept that has not been fully worked out. It's an ambiguous concept, meaning that it could mean a lot of things, depending on who you're talking to. So, a far from perfect definition. This is just something I assembled through I've read a pretty good bit about quality of life. That this is just a starter. This isn't even what I'd call an operational definition, because it's not refined enough to be one, but it gives you a sense of what is in mind when we talk about a person's quality of life. Well, an individual's quality of life might be defined as the combination of externally observable and subjectively reportable demonstrable variables related to the individual's overall well-being. So quality of life tends to have to do with this notion of well-being, how well a person's life is going. And we're familiar with this. I mean, quality of life isn't a made-up thing, because people do talk about that my life is going better now than it was before. And that's a subjective report. Like someone says, how's your life going? They say, whoa, it's much better now than it was 10 years ago. So their well-being, the wellness of their life, not just their health, but their subjective take on how well their life is going. That all goes into well-being. The observable, externally observable, might be their health, their financial status, their home life, all those things. The subjectively reportable is how that person actually perceives the way their life is going, given these other externally observable variables like their money, their health, whatever. And all of that combines to generate like some quality of the overall individual's life, their overall well-being. That's kind of the most general thing one could say that quality of life has to do with. Now, regardless of how it's defined, quality of life is multidimensional. You'll hear this in some of your other classes at times, like you'll encounter things that are called multidimensional concepts. All that means is that there's a lot of different things that go into making up the concept. Well, for example, let's do something simple, like say the color red. Well, the color red is a concept. It's like it's an idea that if someone says, oh yeah, like I just did, I said the color red. Well, people probably thought of various red things or just red in general. But we all know that there's many shades of red. Like there's red that's over there toward the pink scale. There's kind of muddy red toward the brown scales. There's darker reds toward the blues, the blacks, the purple scale. So when we say red, and someone talks about red, there's a lot of different, contrast or degrees or shades of red that all of us could have thought about. So there's a lot of, in terms of shades, red has a lot of dimensions, meaning there's a lot of shades of red. But they all fall under the concept of red. So red is a multi-dimensional concept in that it has, in a sense, you would say it's got one dimension shade, but that one dimension has many sub-dimensions. That's one way to think about the red being multi-dimensional, meaning that all that means is that there's a lot of other things under the concept. It's a grabber word. It refers to lots of different things at one time. That's the notion of a multidimensional concept. Well, when we talk about quality of life, it's like red, except much more complex, because there's not just shades of quality of life. It's like whole different aspects. Like, for example, an individual's quality of life and the quality of life assessments, those things are going to have to take into consideration like the individual's physical, mental, emotional, social, productive, and material states of being, like their health, their comfort, their wealth, their happiness. That's all under quality of life. As well as it takes the extent of his or her interpersonal relationships, how well they're included in those relationships, how they work with their job, their co-workers, their family members. Also, what groups do they actually belong to? Do they feel like they belong to? Do they have a sense of belonging with? And then their personal development, their becoming, like what projects is that person engaged in life? Are they meaningful projects of work? Like that factors into an assessment of someone's quality of life. Also, how much ability do they have to self-determine and make decisions? How autonomous are they? Remember that notion of autonomy that deontology people care a whole lot about. Is how much autonomy does a person actually have? And what about their rights? Like, how many rights does the government or the state or their groups that they're members of, how much rights and privileges and entitlements and responsibilities and constraints does that person live under on a day-to-day basis? All of those factors would have to be assessed in order to develop a score for someone's quality of life. Like a person's quality of life is determined by enormous amounts of factors. Enormous. Enormous. Just keep that in mind. Just and think about it in your own personal life. Like, what goes into determining when you say, yeah, this year is better than last year? Think about all the things in your life that may have changed between those 2 years, like social, financial, personal relationships, your degrees of happiness. Did you move to a new house? Did you get a new car? Did you change jobs? Just think of all of those factors that could be partially responsible for and go into supporting your claim that my life is better this year than it was last year. And just really take a few moments to think through how many things would have influenced your overall quality of life. All of those things would need to be assessed in order to develop a score, to be able to numerically put a number on your quality of life. And I mean, why would we want to put a number on it? Well, then we can compare it to what your quality of life was before, say, you had a medical intervention done. And then we can compare it to after you had that intervention done. Or we can try to home in on what factors made the most difference in your quality of life. We try to assign numbers to all of these things. This is how empirical research is done anyway. And so as an example, like, what does this actually look like? Well, I found an example. It's kind of cool, actually. This is just a study that was done. I think it was done in Canada. No, it's in Minnesota. This University of Minnesota. I was looking at a lot of them when I was developing this video. But these are measures, indicators, and improvements of quality of life in nursing homes. This is standard. This is nothing especially magical or mysterious about this. This is how quality of life scales like the metric, like what is the yardstick? How do we measure a person's quality of life? Well, this is a study that was trying to figure out what kind of measures can we use to assess the quality of life of people living in nursing homes. That's what this study did. And you can read it. It's linked in the voluntary material for this week. But it tells you how they develop these QOL numbers, these quality of life numbers, the domains they looked at. They said that the scales presented here assess 11 domains of quality of life. That means 11 dimensions, 11 major categories. And there's going to be subcategories under those 11. But here they were, the domains: physical comfort. And the way to think about this is how we might go about trying to measure the quality of life of a person or a group of people. What do we take into consideration? Well, their physical comfort, their functional competence, like how aware are they, how can they interact with the tasks they have to perform every day, are they successful at tying their shoes, brushing their teeth, writing letters, watching the news and understanding what's happening on the news, functional competence. Privacy, does a person feel like they have privacy? Or do they feel like everybody's always into everything they have? They have nothing that's their own. They have no privacy. Their autonomy, can they make their own choices? Can those choices be followed through? Can they carry them out? Not only can they choose, but they have the will to make them happen. What about dignity? Do they feel like they're dignified, that they're respected, that that it's intact and respected? Or do they feel belittled, devalued, humiliated? Dignity. Meaningful activity. Do residents, in this case in a nursing home, are they engaged in meaningful projects? Or at least watching meaningful projects, like folks that are engaged in, maybe a sewing class or something, learning something new, that they actually have a product they might be proud of at the end of it. Enjoyment. Do they actually like what they're eating? Think about how big that one could be. Imagine you're in a place and all the food is terrible to you. It tastes bad. You get sick and nauseous just every time you smell the food. Think about how that could truly impact your overall quality of your life at that moment. Everywhere there's bad food. That's no fun at all. Individuality. Does a person actually feel like they're an individual that might matter? And that others recognize their individuality, their uniqueness. Relationships. Is a person actually engaged in communicative, productive relationships with other people? Do they have any friends? Or do they at least think they have some friends? Safety, security, and order. Do they feel safe at night? Can you go to sleep at night? Do you feel safe walking in your own yard or in the nursing home or whatever? Spiritual well-being, if they have religious needs or spiritual needs, are they receiving the spiritual nourishment, as is sometimes said, that's necessary to have a certain quality of existence? Yeah, and there's more than these, but this is just the 11 things that this study looked at. Those are the big categories. And so how did they do this? How is it assessed? How do you get numbers? Well, here you go. The comfort scale. So remember, the first category is physical comfort. So now, how would we get numbers to assign to a person's physical comfort? Well, if the person is lucid, they're aware, we can just ask them questions. And that's exactly what they do. This is how quality of life studies tend to be done. And it's the first questions are about how comfortable you are and the help you get to make you more comfortable. Okay. And then there's numbers. So you ask the person the question: how often are you too cold here? So how often do you think it's freezing in here? Well, often gets a 1, sometimes gets a 2, rarely gets a 3, never gets a 4. And then if they don't really want to break it down on that scale, the way this study was done, it could be mostly yes, mostly no. Most of the time, I'm too cold. Most of the time, I'm not too cold. And then there's the numbers you would assign for that. And so then we're not going to go through all these by any means, but how often are you in physical pain? That could directly impact how comfortable a person is. How often are you bothered by noise when you're in your room? Like, or is it always really noisy here? Because noise can be painful and that can create discomfort. And so numbers are assigned. Do you get a good night's sleep here? Like, how well can you actually sleep? And then there's the numbers. And it goes on and on for every one of these things, like functional competence. These are questions that they would ask of the residents of the nursing home, and based on how those residents answer, that's your data. And then it's added up, it's averaged, statistics are performed on it, probabilities are generated based on the way the data comes out, the distribution, confidence intervals, error margins, all of that can be generated just off of this. But now notice, are these the only 5 questions that may be relevant to a person's quality of life in everyday life? No, by no means. Comfort could be determined by not just hot, cold, noise. Like, what about how do you take care of your own things? If you need to go to the bathroom, can you get there quickly? Yeah, in a normal life, though, things like, is my apartment as tidy as I would like it to be? Or is my house as tidy as I'd like it to be? Is my grass mowed on the rate at which I wish it was mowed? Or do I have to walk in weeds half the month until I get time to mow the grass? You see, every bit of that could impact a person's physical comfort or their perception of their physical comfort. Well, I mean, that's not going to impact the physical comfort level, though, of, say, someone in the nursing home necessarily. But it could impact the physical comfort level of someone like you or me if I have to walk in tall weeds with a bunch of sand spurs in the grass because there's not been enough time to mow the grass. And and you walk barefoot to the mailbox. Well, you, of course, could adapt and wear shoes, but the idea is, say, you don't want to wear shoes. And so that unmowed grass significantly decreases your comfort levels, and that has one small part, it's one dimension in your overall quality of life for a particular period in your life. So the questions you ask matter. That's what I'm getting at. That these are just one set of questions. There are other people that have done other quality of life scales for nursing home residents that would ask different questions. Sure, these kind of questions may come up too, but there could be others. Some of these may not appear. These are just questions that the creators of this particular study, namely these people, came up with and thought were good. And they would have looked at other quality of life studies and put their questions together based off of those studies. And they would have added questions they thought were especially relevant to what kind of assessment they were trying to do. There's no unified, all agreed upon question set for assessing physical comfort, social interaction. That's the problem with quality of life studies at the moment, is that there's an abundance of riches. Then not everybody's asking all the same questions all the time. So how do I actually compare one quality of life study against another quality of life study, even if they were both about the quality of life of nursing home residents? If the two study people, if the groups doing the studies use totally different assessment questions and they got totally different sets of numbers, I have no direct way to compare those things because they got their data in a different kind of way. Their data is not the same. It's answers to different questions. Sure, there will be overlap and there'll be similarities, no doubt about it, but just a few different questions could make all the difference in the world in the way those numbers come out. And at the moment, in current medical science, psychological science, that's the state of affairs with the research of quality of life. That's just the way it is right now. But hopefully that gives everybody, and everybody's welcome. Like I said, that document's in the voluntary. You're welcome to look through it, read it, read about how they set it up, how they instruct people to ask the questions. It's good training if you plan to go into a science field or a medical science field, especially to see how the research is actually done in that field, and especially in regards to quality of life. Why? Well, because people in those fields claim to have enhanced someone's quality of life, or they are endeavoring to do so. And in the context of the argument we're looking at, that's what quality of life assessments would have to have included. How are they normally done? Well, questionnaires, more statistics and probability calculations, and then these self-reported quality of life assessments. As I just alluded to, everything that goes into those things can matter in terms of your data and your accuracy and your confidence. How you ask the question, like the people that did that study we just looked at, they go to great pains to tell whoever might use those questions the right and wrong way to approach someone to ask those questions. Like how you ask a question to a person given their mental, physical, whatever state at a given time can make a big difference in how that person answers that question. High levels of subjectivity. And so the structure of the questions, the age of the person, the ailment, their mental, physical condition at the time, their competence, like do they understand what you ask them? Can they still make sense of words? All that kind of stuff. Also environmental, like how did you ask those questions? What was the room like? Was there a lot of noise in the background? Did the person feel like they were in a hurry to be somewhere else? Every bit of that can impact these self-reported quality of life assessments. But in the case of Ashley, there couldn't be self-reporting. Why? Well, because in Ashley's case, Ashley's she can't use language. She can communicate some she can make various noises according to the parents and the doctors. She can look at times at them, but maybe not. So Ashley's not really a good candidate for self-reported quality of life assessments. So the only kind of quality of life assessments that could have taken place in Ashley's case would have been these outsider looking in, where you have researchers and parents looking at Ashley's life and trying to guess what would make her quality of life better or worse. Well, one of those things would be like having bed sores, because she's not picked up and moved that often. Having bed sores is painful, and pain would decrease an everyday person's level of comfort. And so the assumption is that if Ashley is modified in a way that she's easier to move, she's less prone to develop bed sores, so her quality of life should go up. But remember, we don't really know how Ashley perceives bed sores, because we can't see the world through her eyes. We don't know. So how accurate are outsider looking in quality assessments? Like just out of the gate, I mean, there are some quality of life assessments that have been conducted for people with various, impairments. Typically, though, they're self-report. There's not very many about outsider looking in, just someone that's in a situation like Ashley. Given that the cause of her impairments is not known, how would one do a quality of life assessment on someone like Ashley? It has to be based off of just assumed things like physical comfort, physical inclusion, things like that. And it has to be assumed that Ashley would perceive those as good things too. But we can't know that. So there's a big chance any kind of quality of life assessment, not just Ashley, but anytime you see quality of life assessments with an outsider looking in, like a parent projecting over what their child the quality of their child's life, and it's not being reported by the child, it's being reported by a parent, or quality of life reports are being made by physicians looking at someone else, but not actually to receive meaningful feedback from that person, those are iffy at best, because there's a big chance for what's known as confirmation bias. Like, here's an example of confirmation bias. We assume that having less bed sores is a good thing to anybody. And then we do something, and the patient has less bed sores. But this patient may not be cognitively aware all that much. We don't know the levels of pain and discomfort they actually mentally feel, perceive, experience. We don't know that. We can't get in their head. So the idea is we could say, oh yeah, that person, given that they haven't had bed sores in a long time, they're smiling more. So we use the evidence that the observable behavior, they're smiling more, as confirmation that, yeah, less bed sores mean better quality of life. But do we really know the more smiling has to do with less bed sores? No, we don't. That's where we have what's known as a confirmation bias. It's a bias, and bias is not good in research, but it can happen. And I'm just mentioning this just so everyone's aware that making an outsider looking in quality of life assessment, that is scientifically, empirically tricky. I'm not criticizing these efforts to do so. By no means. It's good that people are trying to do it. But it is very important as us assessing argumentation and trying to understand what such argumentation has to mean. We need to know the potential strengths, the potential weaknesses of it. Especially while we're still trying to just develop a charitable rendition of the doctor's argument, or this one reason. So those are just things to notice about quality of life. We've looked at what it means, how it tends to be measured in cases. Now, an interesting thing, that's why these two readings are included this week and from the textbook. These are really great articles to look at. They're awesome and really helpful, they can be, in regards to thinking about quality of life. Typically, a person, just think about us, just everyday people. A quality life tends to be something that includes meaningfulness. It has a purpose. Isn't that what we tend to want to think about quality of life? It's absolutely showing up in that assessment. That if you read more of that quality of life assessment we just looked at, like, are you engaged in meaningful activities? Activities that seem purposive, that have a reason for doing them. Those kind of things tend to be very important in like everyday quality of life assessments. So the idea is that's what Taylor and Wolf, their articles are about, is what does it mean to have a meaningful life versus a meaningless life? What is like one or two of the hugely important factors that have to come into play in order for a life to be meaningful? And what Taylor does a really good job about is Taylor advances the claim that a life can be totally meaningful to the person that lives it, even if it looks out from the outside, it looks absolutely terrible. He talks about the sort of myth of Sisyphus. It's so interesting, totally worth reading, totally helpful to get a sense of what really is at stake when we're talking about quality life. To most people, when they think of their quality of their life, they're oftentimes referring to how their life matters to them, what matters about their life. If they have more things that matter to them at one point in their life than they had in a previous point in their life, they're very likely to say, my life is much higher quality now than it used to be. Taylor doesn't necessarily, and Taylor and Wolf are not explicitly referring to quality of life. They do mention quality, though. They're talking in terms of meaningfulness and meaninglessness. But having a meaningful life seems to be a crucially important aspect of having a higher quality life. having a meaningless life where it seems like nothing matters. That tends to indicate a lower quality of life. That's how these two articles relate to it. And they are pure philosophy all day long, but extremely relevant and interesting, just inherently interesting to think about while you're thinking about Ashley's overall quality of life. Like, does anything that Taylor and Wolfe they talk about that goes into having a meaningful or meaningless life, how would that apply to Ashley? It's interesting to think about it in these terms, and also in terms of quality of life assessments from a scientific, medical, empirical point of view. For Taylor, the meaning comes from within. That's his big claim that he tries to defend throughout the article you'll read. That his claim is that you can have a life that everybody else from the outside looking in thinks is terrible, but to you, depending on what your motivations, drives, obsessions are, could be totally meaningful to you. Someone like Wolfe says, no, that's not enough. That in order to truly have a meaningful life, it can't just be that it matters to you. It has to actually objectively be involving projects of worth, like worthwhile things. Like for Taylor, someone could that they say they have an obsession. There's nothing they'd rather do in this life than sit on a couch and eat potato chips until they die, and say that's what they do every day. Well, according to Taylor, that person's life could be totally meaningful to that person. It matters. They want to eat potato chips every day. They eat potato chips every day. That means they have a meaningful life. They get to do exactly what they want to do every day. How could that not be meaningful to that person? That's the way Taylor kind of goes. And Wolfe would look at the potato chip sofa sitter as not engaged in any projects of worth and therefore not having a meaningful existence. Even if that person thinks their life is meaningful, Wolfe would argue in the overall it's actually not. It's not enough just for a person to think their life is meaningful. It actually has to actually be meaningful in terms of projects of worth that are objectively observable, that others would agree that, yeah, you're engaged in a project of worth. And what that means is very important. Wolfe gives examples. Absolutely, when you're reading these things, just think in terms of quality of life assessments. Think in terms of Ashley's some particular situation. Is totally cool to think about it in those terms. Totally It's very helpful to get a sense of the notion of quality life. That's why those articles are included this way. So while much empirical research has been done on defining and measuring these QOLs, these quality of life things, there's no overall consensus yet. And that can be very problematic when we're trying to assess arguments and reasons that refer to quality of life studies and assessments. If there's not a consensus, the science is not that exact yet, then how exact can one really be when they claim to have enhanced someone's quality of life? Not very exact at all. That's the end result. So what is the take-home message from all this stuff, all these words? That whenever a medical or a scientific person claims that a decision or action, that it was enhanced or that it was likely enhanced a patient's quality of life, then what you should always find, what that medical or scientific person has to be referring to and have to mean by that is that there has been quality of life assessments, various statistical calculations have taken place, tons of data collected, and then that data is combined with this benefit risk analysis to determine, when you put benefit risk analysis tied in with quality of life assessments, that's the two big pieces that are needed to support a claim that an intervention enhanced someone's quality of life. Those two pieces have to be there. And the degree of certainty and the degree of the quality of the evidence, the data, all of that impacts how strong or how weak the claim can be about we enhanced quality of life. It may have to be watered down in order to actually account for the actual level of evidence. And so, what such supposedly has to empirically mean is that this data was collected, risk benefit calculations were performed, and that the confidence intervals, the probabilities were within a predetermined acceptable range. That is what happens when you see the phrase enhance a patient's quality of life. That's what it has to medically, empirically mean. So that's what Dykema and Faust and Gunther have to mean when they say that. Okay, so what are the proposed quality of life enhancements and the benefits versus the risk according to Gunther, Dykema, Faust for Ashley? Well, the proposed benefits is that it's easy, that being easier to move means that Ashley is more likely to be moved. Okay, and being moved more frequently reduces bed sore potential. It also enhances the opportunity for Ashley to be included in more family activities. It gives her more stimulation due to more inclusion, less long-term medical complications, like, for example, developing blood clots from being sort of confined to one location hours after hours, day after day after day, which is what would sometimes happen in certain long-term care facilities of people like Ashley. So instead, by having attenuated her size or her growth, kind of forced her to remain small, it has the potential benefit of she will be moved more, included more, be more actively involved as her parents pick her up, her family carry her around, do stuff with her. And then that prevents like long-term blood clot issues, bed sore issues, on and on. And also it provides more direct physical contact between Ashley and her parents. Somewhere in quality of life studies, you'll often see like physical contact, actually being touched by other people that care about you, like someone hugging you, things like that can actually boost one's like serotonin levels or whatever levels and create better senses of euphoria. Essentially, pleasant feelings result from being hugged, things like that, which all of us probably know that. At least we have like subjective experience of such things. But they have done research on that. Extended time under parental care rather than institutional care, meaning that by doing these interventions, Ashley's parents will be enabled to care for her for longer years in their life. Because eventually Ashley's parents will become older themselves, and as they become older, the burden of age will start to weigh on them, and that Ashley's size and the fact that she's won't endure menstruation, no pregnancy, all these other cancers, that the possibilities of incurring such are eliminated given the parts that were removed, that those are burdens that the parents won't have to encounter later down the line. But that it also benefits Ashley supposedly because she is in their care. And that would be better supposedly than institutional care. And significantly reduced chance, as I mentioned, breast, uterine type cancers, zero chance of pregnancy. That was the proposed benefits of the interventions. There's others. When you read the articles by Dykema, Gunther, Faust, you'll see they mention others besides these, but these are some of the big ones. The acknowledged risk is there was a pretty big risk. Not big, according to Dykema and Gunther, but there is a risk of developing thrombosis. There's a lot of kinds of thrombosis. At the end of the day, it's just some form of blood clotting. And blood clots could go to a lung, the brain, the kidneys, any place that they don't really need to be, and a person could die from it. So blood clotting can be very serious. But so that's an acknowledged risk. There could be down the road complications due to the surgery, breast bud removal, hysterectomy. Things like that are just normal things that could happen. whatever side effects of the medical interventions or undergoing surgeries of these sort, all the risk of long-term complications from those are acknowledged risk by the doctors. Also, any down the road complications due to high dose estrogen regime that was done. And the biggest risk of all is the significant uncertainties associated with these medical interventions in general. Primarily because Ashley's particular group, and by that what's meant is people who are in, or who have the impairments like Ashley does due to an unknown medical cause. They don't know what caused Ashley's impairments. D'Amica and all of them will tell you that. It's unknown. That means there is tremendous uncertainty about what complications could arise from any of these things. It's not known. It's not that they don't know the possibility of thrombosis. It's that given Ashley the particular causal mechanism of the situation she's in, without knowing the cause and all of its effects, if you don't know the cause, you can't really know all of the possible effects in medicine or machine craft or of any kind, biologic mechanism. You don't know the causes, you just can't know with any significant degree of certainty. Thrombosis is just typical. Blood clotting can happen from any form of birth control or any form of hormone treatment. That's just a widely documented possibility. But there's no real certainty about if blood clotting might be more likely in people in Ashley's case than not in her case. Given that the actual causal mechanism of what brought this about is not known. There's not been a whole lot of research on Ashley's particular group about how these particular interventions as a bundle might play out. Why? Because this was one of the first times it was ever done. That is, the reasons for doing it were novel. It's not that these things haven't been done with people with impairments like Ashley. It's just to have done them all at one time. It's not yet known what the ultimate outcomes will be. So where are the calculations, confidence intervals, error margins? Think about that. I'm just mentioning it. So, what kind of charitable rendition of the doctor's argumentation can we do? Well, this was just my first shot at it, just thinking about it. Their reasons, the conclusion is thus our decisions and actions were maybe or likely moral or ethical. Let's read these reasons. It's always morally okay to enhance another being's quality of life when doing so does not diminish the quality of life of others, especially if and when the individual helped already endures and likely will forever endure a lower than normal quality of life. That's just the moral principle and the enhancement we've already seen. Reason 2, efforts to enhance Ashley's quality of life did not diminish the quality of life of others. In fact, they may have enhanced the quality of life of her parents. Well, that seems plausible, seems true. Ashley already endured and likely will forever endure a lower than normal quality of life. Well, this reason just enhances 1 and 2. It just is an enhancer reason. You don't necessarily have to put it in here, but it does make their argument, it makes their overall argument look a little more plausible, so it doesn't hurt to put it in there. Reason 4 is that quality of life assessments were conducted and risk-benefit analyses were performed, and the probabilities, confidence intervals, etc. were good enough to say that our decisions and actions were maybe or likely enhanced Ashley's quality of life. That's reason 4 is the result of all that we've been talking about reason 4. This is the best that we can give Dykema Gunther. We can't anymore say that these interventions absolutely enhanced her quality of life. That's not possible. Even Gunther and Dykema admit that. But how likely is it? Well, on to reason 5. Even if the interventions didn't significantly enhance her quality of life, it's likely that they did not diminish it more than the standard interventions would have. That is also a likelihood probability claim. I didn't put it in here, but even if they didn't significantly enhance it, yeah, I did. It's likely. That's the best they can give. That's the best we can give them when we're being charitable. I mean, we're not trying to set them up to fail here. We're trying to give them the best we can give them. Thus, our decisions and actions, this is the doctors, were maybe, likely, moral, or ethical. That's the best argument they can offer us. I don't see how they can do any better than that. So now it's charitable, given what's said within the articles. Everyone in here, you can read the articles yourself. But this may be less confident than the doctors would like for it to be. Maybe, maybe not. We'll have to think about that. But this is about the best we can give them argumentatively. The maybe conclusion. We can say maybe they did more. What they did was moral or ethical. But is it a likely maybe? Is it more likely maybe? Or is it more likely maybe not? That likely means that maybe could go either way. Okay, that's not the most confident conclusion one could have when it comes to ethics and morality, but it's realistic. I mean, and it's charitable. So now, analysis. This is where you look at the strengths. This is the 7th phase of this philosophical process of inquiry. You look for strengths, look for weaknesses. Well, we've looked in terms of the charitable stuff. We've tried to understand and be charitable. And if I had to acknowledge a strength, which I think I didn't put it in here, but if I had to acknowledge a strength of their argumentation, it would be that it has the potential to gain empirical support. That is one strength of this sort of argumentation up here, is that these quality of life assessments, risk-benefit analysis, this notion of good enough, if there is sufficient data and quality data to back this stuff up, that can be a pretty strong argument. Assuming that enhancing quality of life is moral, and if they can in fact demonstrate that such enhancements did in fact take place to some high degree of likelihood, they have a pretty good case for saying, yeah, it's likely that our actions were moral and ethical. But remember, the best they'll ever be able to get is likely. There's no 100% certainty in medicine or science or real life. So in an empirical standing situation like they're in, making an argument from their profession, the best they can do is say, yeah, it's really likely, like then there'd be some number like 99% chance that it was really likely. That's the strength of this kind of argumentation, is data can make it stronger. That's a very powerful strength. I don't want people to overlook that. A very powerful strength of empirical-based ethical arguments. But some questions I would have and concerns about that reasoning. This is critique. Is the first question I'd have, is it always morally okay to enhance another being's quality of life, as long as doing so does not diminish the quality of life of others? In answer to that question, I can honestly say, I don't know. That there may be counterexample cases where enhancing someone's quality of life, even though you didn't diminish the quality of life of anyone else, may not be the most moral thing to do. I couldn't think of any cases where such could occur, but I encourage everyone in this class, think about that. Can you think of a scenario where we enhance someone's overall well-being, the way their life is going, we don't detract from anyone else, and yet that action could may not be 100% ethical or moral? If you can think of any case, All it takes is one. Then that first reason, that first set of reasons would be problematic. I couldn't think of any, but that doesn't mean that a counterexample doesn't exist. I encourage everybody to do so. But that's a potential weakness in the argument. It may or may not be. It depends. If a counterexample shows up, it may be very weak. If we can't think of anything, then it may be perfectly plausible. So their first reasons about, it's moral to do this, yeah, I mean, that could be true. My biggest concern, though, is where these explicit calculations and probabilities. There's no doubt that Dykema, Gunther, Faust, all of the articles, they point to certain studies that were done about growth attenuation and the possible risk. They point to studies that were done about hysterectomy stuff, all of that. They do point to those studies. That's good. But throughout all of these articles that we're reading, there is no explicit exposure of the numbers. That we haven't seen anything that looks like these things. Have we? Where are their calculations? That is suspicious, argumentatively. That is what is needed. Those calculations are needed to support this fourth reason. Quality of life assessments were conducted and risk-benefit analysis were performed and the probabilities, confidence intervals, etc. were good enough to say that their decisions and actions maybe or likely enhanced Ashley's quality of life. Dykema and the other authors refer to risk-benefit analysis. They say that. And they repeatedly say that the risks were lesser than the benefits. They say this. They claim it. That's why it's a reason for them. But where's the evidence for those things? I'm not asking for the evidence that studies have been done about potential problems, or benefits of various surgeries. Of course, that's been done. But what about Ashley's particular group? Her group. That is what they would need, is quality of life assessments for patients in Ashley's particular impairment group. But the cause of her impairment and how that might play out, that's currently unknown. Dykema, Gunther, and them admit that. So how could we really have quality of life assessments or risk-benefit calculations that have any degree of confidence or a good probability? Is that even possible? Might that be why we don't see numbers? I don't know, but these are defensive articles. I mean, they're defensive articles, and their frontline defense is to say that we did nothing wrong because we enhanced our quality of life, or it's very, very likely that we did. Well, they need the data to back up that very, very likely claim that they keep pushing. I've looked through the articles in the bibliography. I encourage everybody, look through those articles. Maybe I overlooked something. Maybe it's in there. But the authors, Dykema, Faust, and Gunther, all admit that there is a tremendous amount of uncertainty around Ashley's particular group. And that given that this particular treatment regime may not have ever been performed on someone in Ashley's exact sort of group. That means that how could there be accurate numbers? Remember, statistics is typically based off of long-term historical data collection. That's what gives you the ability to find the average, to find the deviations, to do confidence interval stuff across samples versus populations. But if you only have a population of one and you can't really access self-reporting by that population of one, given Ashley's particular situation, then how do you make quality of life assessments except, projecting those onto her? And that may or may not be, accurate. That would depend on other quality of life assessments. We can't assess the accuracy of whether Ashley's quality of life, what that even means for Ashley, without having research that is specific to cases just like Ashley's, which there has been some research done about people in various states of disability and their quality of life. Such research has been done, no doubt about it, but it would still, Gunther, Dykema, and all them would have to provide evidence to support the idea that that research is actually applicable and relevant to Ashley's particular group, because with an unknown causal origin of her impairments, we still need evidence, of a connection between the data that may have been done by other people and the data that Gunther and Dykema and all the specialists, the ethics committee were actually using. We need to see that. As it relates specifically to Ashley, remember, this is an argument about Ashley. So it has to be the relevance of that data to her particular case in a benefit risk analysis directly applicable to her particular case is what's needed. I don't see that in the articles. I see a lot of claims of such happening, but I don't see evidence that it happened. But that's just me. Maybe it's there. Other people can make their own determination. And then there's this repeated referral to uncertainty. To me, when I read these articles, Dykema or the Gunther, the group of physicians is often really quick to, when they get under pressure about what about the legitimacy of your prognosis? Like, yeah, okay. This is good. Let's look. Yeah, here we go. In this article, so that, everybody knows I'm not just making these concerns up, is in this Ashley Revisited Response to Critics. One of these objections, I think it's objection 6, objection 1, there's 25 of them, so it takes us a second. It benefits the parents, not the child. Violates her dignity. Okay. Makes her freak. No. Violates her rights. Failed to respect her autonomy. There was no urgency. Oh, here we go. One of these is like, you could be wrong with her about her prognosis. This is one of the objections that Dykema, Gunther, False, they try to respond to. So how do they respond to an objection like, you could be wrong about her prognosis? Well, their response is the possibility that a prognosis might underestimate the future abilities of someone with severe cognitive and physical disabilities will always exist, and may be the strongest reason for taking great care in making decisions of the sort that were made in Ashley's case. But this problem is not unique to this situation or these interventions. Medical practice is inherently uncertain. Right there. Okay. And there's research to back that up. Or at least one article that supposedly does. So sometimes patients do better than predicted, sometimes they do worse. If this concern were sufficient to preclude the use of any potentially beneficial intervention that also carries some potential harm, many treatments would never be offered to patients. So essentially the reply here, and going down, uncertainty. Uncertainty is a reason to be cautious and delay interventions when possible, but a patient in Ashley's situation should not be denied potentially beneficial interventions simply because because a small possibility. See that right there? because a small possibility exists that the prognosis is wrong. Okay, Ashley's prognosis was based on the assessment of highly qualified physicians with relevant expertise and familiarity with the literature regarding children with Ashley's condition. Okay, so that's a promissory note. But notice it's like there's a lot of uncertainty. And it's a reason to be cautious, but not. Ashley, why? Well, because of all this literature. These people and physicians who are familiar with this literature. Okay, where is that literature? Where's the calculation? Well, how do I know that it was exactly but a patient in Ashley's situation? That's not a problem, in that that's not an immediate problem. Like patient in her situation, you might not think that that's to be concerned about, and maybe it's not. But where is it? Let me look again. Wherever it mentions in these articles, you'll find it that there's an admission that the causal mechanism is not known. And that is why it makes me wonder about the group. Okay, it's right here. Page 1015. I'm just justifying why these questions are in my mind to everyone here. Here it is. Because we have no direct experience with high-dose estrogen treatment in young children, the possible adverse effects and risks are difficult to assess with certainty. Okay, no direct experience with it, that's one thing. And then up here, how much reduction in height could be expected to achieve in these children with this high dose? Well, without prior experience, we can only speculate. This stuff shows up a lot in these articles. And then over here, this is, he talks about the risk of thrombosis. That the risk of thrombosis is also increased among these people receiving this therapy. The mechanism through which this estrogen increases thrombogenesis is not completely clear, but probably. But he does point to evidence there. So the way in which this high estrogen therapy treatment is supposed to work, the actual mechanism is not completely clear. The actual risk of thrombosis in developmentally delayed children is difficult to assess. Although it seems decreased in young, some evidence suggests blah blah. This is concerning to me, where there's all this mention of uncertainty. And somewhere in here, I can't find it right at the moment, but there's a mention that the exact cause of Ashley's condition is not known. That's a lot of uncertainties, and I don't see any numbers directly offered about the risk-benefit analysis that was done for Ashley with her particular condition, her group, that it makes me wonder if there's any testable, verifiable stuff there at all. I mean, was it just consulting a lot of people and a lot of people gave a thumbs up? That may be okay, but there's got to be some numbers somewhere in there. I mean, it can't just be we all had a gut feeling and a hope. It's got to be more than that. I'm not saying that this stuff wasn't done, but it concerns me when I get a lot of claims throughout these defensive articles of there's this inherent uncertainty. Some certain mechanisms of the interventions are not known. How Ashley ended up in this situation, the mechanisms in her mind, her brain, her body, those are not unknown or completely understood. Well, all of those claims added up individually may not be a big deal, but if you add all those up, that's a lot of little uncertainties. And And that makes me wonder, how could a legitimate quality of life assessment being conducted about Ashley when she can't respond on her own? And then an enhancement claim needs a benefit risk analysis. Well, how could a good one in her case have been done if there is all these inherent uncertainties? I'm not saying that this analysis upends their argumentation. I'm not saying that it's so much that it damages this argument where it has no hope. As I said, that second reason is what my concerns really kind of hover around. I'm not saying that their reasoning can't be defensible, that it can't be made better. But what I am concerned about is right at this moment, this is really iffy. I mean, like this in terms of actually being true, I cannot assess reason for truth right now. I don't know if that's true. I mean, I know that, yeah, maybe. Sure, that's true. But likely? I don't know because I haven't seen the actual numbers specific to her case. Sure, they provide numbers of all these other cases, but then they actually make a point in other places to say, yeah, we can't be sure that Ashley fits into these populations, but it seems like she would. But where's the numbers for the seems claim that it seems like? Granted, medical stuff is never 100%. But there's got to be some sort of case where the risk and the benefits were weighed and there was numerics assigned, qualities, dollies, something. I don't see that. Until I see that, I can't say. At this moment, this argument's not successful, though, to my mind, because it is not defended them out completely. But it could, because that now we're down in my decide, do I buy it? At this moment, no, I don't buy it. And not to say that they can't support it more, but argumentatively, how can you provide a strong defense if you always are introducing and acknowledging so much inherent uncertainty in what you're doing? That if you are that uncertain, well, how can you have any certainty that you actually behaved morally or ethically? You can't be certain that you did the right thing if you're uncertain that you did the right thing. You know, it's like that's just the basic reality of this kind of stuff. And so, as I said, does it mean that this particular big picture argument offered by the doctors, that it's totally broken? No. But it does mean that there are legitimate things that people may be concerned about with it. And everybody in here can think about it. I'm not saying that it's defeated. By no means. I think that it's got the strength of science on its side if good numbers and good data and good methodology can be revealed. But at the moment, that's not in their major defense articles. That's where it needs to be. It's not there. So it's not good enough to just point at a bibliography, unless you're pointing at your own articles in that bibliography and they contain the math. That's not what they've done, though. So, but people are willing, more than welcome. Maybe I missed something. Go in there. If you can find it, great. But at the moment, I'm not buying it. And I've given the reasons why I'm not buying it. So the results is me sharing it with you folks. What do you think? Was I charitable enough to these doctors' quality of life argumentation? Did I miss something? It's totally possible. I could have made a mistake. I'm not making a definitive, I've got the right way of it claim at all. I'm just saying, given what I've seen, looking at the reasoning, the argumentative structure, the lack of certain numerics that I think they were obligated to provide in those particular articles, given that they're not there, I'm not willing to buy their argumentation that appears in those articles without those numerics. So, did they do morally right, morally wrong? I don't know. The jury's still out. Okay, that being said, that gives us a glimpse of one of the big picture arguments. I encourage people, think about it. Read it yourself, look at it. That's the point of a class like this one. By no means take my word as the final word when it comes to an assessment of the argument. That when it comes to an analysis of an argument, all I can do is give you my questions, my concerns, my reasons for those concerns, and it's on everybody else to see if any of that's legitimate or not. That's the way argumentation works. It's never perfect. The assessment of it's never perfect. But that at least gives us something to get started with, and we've been able to see how that pattern of philosophical inquiry, how it plays out in the real case. That's what we've been able to do up to this point. Now, just a few comments about this week's discussion. I've engaged, that's what everyone has been able to witness in this video, is I'm doing what's known as engaging with the words that were offered by the doctors in this case. I've been thinking about them, trying to make sense of them, trying to be charitable, flagging my concerns, all of that sort of stuff. Now, everyone in this class will get that same opportunity in this week's discussion, but instead of focusing on this sort of big picture argumentation, I think it's more productive for everyone in the class to focus on the objections that appear in this article. The Dykema and Faust's response, like Ashley revisited a response to the critics, Dykema and Faust. In this article, they generate lots of objections that people have raised against their reasoning. And then they respond to those objections. That's what they're doing. And their overall claim in this is that they hold that every one of these objections is implying that what they did was morally wrong. In their reply, and they give a response to each of these objections. In this week's discussion, what we do is you'll pick one of these objections. There's 25 of them to choose from. See? There's tons of them. They're categorized under what they kind of concern seems to be underneath them. And what the task is you pick one of them, tell us which one you pick. Then put the objection in your own words. Like Dykema and Faust, they kind of, sometimes they include a little paragraph from somebody that they think used the objection. But put it in your own words. Like read the objection, like here in that, like the objection, this stuff violated her dignity. And then here's an example of an author that Dykema and Faust say would launch this objection. Put this objection in your own words and be as charitable as possible and try to identify the concerns, the values, disvalues that are underlying the objection. The reason you want to do that is because if you know what concerns or values or disvalues motivate someone to object in the way they did, then you will be better able to assess whether Dykema, Faust, their replies are actually relevant. Like, just because somebody offers words in response to an objection, it does not mean that their words actually, alleviated the problem the objection was pointing to. That it's totally possible for a response to an objection to entirely miss the point of the objection. So that's why what you do is you pick an objection, put it in your own words, try to identify what concerns, what values, what disvalues were motivating that objection. Be as charitable as possible. Give the objector, whoever it would be, the best, you have. Make their objection seem real, that it matters. Because it mattered enough for somebody to generate an objection, it mattered to them. Help us understand the significance of that objection, the motivation for it. Then read the doctor's response to that objection and put it in your own words. Let us know how they responded. I mean, clearly they have a lot of words here. You don't put all these words in your response. You summarize it, condense it down to a few sentences, no more than a paragraph, of how the doctors replied to the objection. Then you assess that objection or the response. What is a strength about their response? What is a weakness about it? Was it relevant to the objection? Did it actually alleviate the concern of the objection? Did it turn it aside? And your reasons for thinking that, one way or another. And then that's what we'll be doing in this week's discussion. So it gives everyone the opportunity to engage with these objections and learn about them. There's a lot of really cool ones in here, like you're playing God. That's an objection. Their response is interesting. You get to read it, summarize it, make sense of it. This is not natural. These things, but there's more than just a one sentence thing. Society needs to change, not the child. You'll have to read their response kind of to make sense of what the likely motivations for some of these objections to what they were doing is coming from. But you also kind of just think about someone that would make an objection like this against what the doctors have done and try to identify those values, disvalues, concerns, motivations, and then assess the responses by the doctors. And what you'll encounter in these objections, it's good to notice it right now because it does come up many times, and it'll show back up throughout the semester, is what's known as slippery slope. One or more of the objections, it raises this concern about a slippery slope. Like, why might it that if we allow people to do what Dykema and these parents have done with Ashley, that sets a precedent. That means it's done before, other people can see that it's been done, and then other people can do the same thing. Well, what if when we do that thing and a precedent set, then all these things happen where we end up at the bottom of a slope that's terrible that we don't want to be in? We definitely don't want to end up at Z, so we shouldn't do A. So the idea is if we do one thing, it leads to other things, and at the end of that long sloping list of things is something terrible. We don't want that terrible thing, so we shouldn't do whatever it is that gets it all started. The way that applies in the Ashley case is that the doctors and the parent, they set a precedence by performing these sort of interventions with Ashley. Some people say that that was the first step on a path that leads us to where we just chop up disabled people for no purpose whatsoever. We turn them into lab rat experimental subjects. And that seems horrible morally. We don't want that. So we shouldn't want what happened that Dykema or Ashley's parents did. Is that they were wrong to have started this thing because now it's already sliding down this terrible hill where we end up with a whole bunch of immorality of impaired, disabled people being mistreated entirely by society, by medical, scientific staff. Now, could that just be fear-mongering? Sometimes it can be. That's why slippery slope argumentation is not guaranteed to be valid. It's actually presumed fallacious initially. The only way one can pull off a slippery slope argumentation is you have to show that, in fact, you have to provide evidence that if A is done, then B, C, D, E, F, Z are almost certain to follow. You have to know some sense of the likelihoods of all of these things happening, and then you have to have support that we definitely don't want to end up at the end of that bad chain of events. Then you can get support for the claim that we probably shouldn't have done A. But you'll get to see that play out in some of the objections and Dykema's and the other doctors' replies to them. It's really useful to get a familiarity with this right up front. Just know that slippery slope is weak argumentation unless someone provides a whole bunch of evidence for these slips down the slope. And we'll see more of it as we go through, but I just want to draw everybody's attention that this shows up in some of the objections and they respond to it, and it is really neat to see how they respond to it. Also, there's tons of opportunities when you select your objection and reply. There's plenty of opportunities to use what we've learned about deontology and consequentialism, like there's no medical indication for these interventions. They were unnecessary. That might indicate a consequentialist picture that the best for the most is not being secured here. We have no evidence to think that. You can just think in terms of consequentialism, deontology, the stuff we've been talking about, as you're reading these things, and you'll notice it. Like the harms and this harms and devalues the class of disabled persons, that objection. That notion of devaluing a whole class of people, that just screams the notion of deontology. That whoever would launch this kind of objection is motivated, they highly value respect, dignity for the person. And so anybody that launches this is going to be pulling from a sort of deontological picture. And so given that you know that, you can see if the response offered by these doctors is actually, up to the task of demonstrating, in fact, we generated respect and value rather than disvalue and disrespect. You can use those tools that knowledge we've already gained to look at these things and think about it. So, notions of discrimination, all of that just screams deontology concerns. So, these things, as you look through them, just pick one and do as instructed on this week's discussion. It'll be really cool to see which ones everybody picks. And also, people can pick one. And there's no guarantee that your peer in the class is going to pick the same one. So the idea is everybody picking these, there's a chance we may see how people thought about all of these objections, all 25. And that'll be really cool. If not, a lot of people may pick the same ones. That's fine too. We'll get a lot of analysis of just a few of the objections. Either ways it goes, there's a lot that we can learn by walking through these steps of looking at objections, looking at replies. It helps us become better at replying to objections that people may launch against our reasoning in the future, as well as it gives us practice learning how to navigate those things and read them and understand them, because that's going to show up in other articles as we go through this semester. Things like this with objections, replies to objections. So it's important to get a familiarity with it now, and it helps us better understand how Dykema, the doctors, were thinking. And that may help us make a better determination about what we ultimately think of whether anything moral or immoral happened in this case. But I hope this video is helpful. Definitely let me know if there's any questions. And I look forward to seeing what everyone comes up with in this week's discussion. Until then.